What's up, Ice and Fire fans? Welcome back to the House of Vine podcast and the episode 2 breakdown of Game of Thrones Season 6. I know many of you had a problem with how I did last week's episode, so this time I'll try to keep the nitpicking down to a minimum, especially since this was a whole lot better than the previous episode. So, enough with the intro chit-chat, let's get started. We start the episode beyond the wall with the reappearance of Brandon Stark, who hasn't been seen in 11 episodes. He and Bloodraven are jacked into the Matrix, and by the Matrix, I mean the hive-minded / blended consciousness of the old gods. This werewood vision takes them directly to Winterfell, and we get to see a young Eddard and a young Benjen. Also, by the looks of it, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be Roger Cassell. Now, in the show, they kinda screwed this whole warging into werewood trees thing up. In the books, only werewoods that have faces carved into them can be used to see the past / present by greenseers, which this tree does have. However, the problem with this particular flashback is that Winterfell only has one werewood, and it's located out in the Godswood. So, unless the castle used to have one growing in the middle of their training yard, there's no way Bran would be able to see any of this stuff with his father, unless it happened in front of the tree. If you're wondering where the eldest Stark sibling is, Brandon, my guess is that he's being fostered by the Dustins in Barrowton. We hear Ned mention that he'll be heading to the Eyrie soon, so we're probably going to see a scene where Ned meets King Robert for the first time. Then Ned's little sister, Lyanna, came riding in through the front gate, showing off for her brothers. Eddard tells Ben to try going up against Willis, aka Hodor. Yes, Hodor is not his real name. In the books, Old Nan tells us his real name is actually Walder, but I guess showrunners changed it so fans wouldn't associate him with the phrase. Clearly, Hodor was not born the way he is now. When Bran says that he saw him, it's pretty obvious that his Hodoring isn't just nonsense. I have a feeling that something happened to Willis while play fighting with the Starks, probably a head injury. Bloodraven tells Bran it's time to return and forcefully pulls him out of his trance. Bran gets upset, saying that this was the first thing that he's been shown that he actually cared about. I wonder what else Bloodraven has been showing Bran. Old Man Rivers says to Brandon, "It is beautiful beneath the sea, but if you stay too long, you will drown." What he means by this is that in the same way Bran could get lost in his wolf by staying in summer for too long, he could possibly lose himself inside the werewood net. Meanwhile, outside the cave, Lady Mira still mourns for her brother Jojen. Bran tries to make small talk, but she just isn't having it. There's a war coming, he says, but she has no idea how they will fight it from a cave deep underground using visions. Then one of the children of the forest tells Mira that Brandon will need her when it's time to leave the cave, most likely for the lands of Always Winter. She informs Mira that Brandon won't be stuck here forever. Many book readers believe that once Bran got into his little tree throne, there was no chance of him leaving, so this might be a huge departure from the books. Up next, we head south to Castle Black and see that Davos and company are out of time. Ser Alliser and his officers, and Ollie, have no chance but to break down the door and take them all out. Even with a direwolf, there was no chance in Seven Hells Davos and friends were going to make it out of that room alive. Thank the mother for giants though, am I right? One comes bursting through Castle Black's gate with 100 wildlings behind him, all led by Tormund Giantsbane. Alliser commands the brothers to attack, but most of them hesitate. Then this asshole tries shooting the humongous fucking giant with an arrow and immediately regrets his life decisions. I thought it was pretty cool how the show paid some homage to A Dance with Dragons when one grabbed this watchman, slammed him into the wall, and tossed him out like yesterday's garbage. The chapter in which Jon gets murdered plays out a lot differently than it did in the show. In the books, Ollie doesn't lure him out with news of his uncle. What happens is that after Jon decides to march south to attack Ramsay at Winterfell, and his officers storm out in protest, a confrontation breaks out between One and a southern knight by the name of Ser Patrick. The knight drew his sword on the creature, and One responds by smashing Ser Patrick against a wall, and continues to do so well after his death. Jon then runs outside after hearing the man scream, and tries to calm the giant down. Bone Marsh and the others use that commotion to sneak up on Jon, and Caesar the shit out of him. One of the key differences between show Night's Watch and book Night's Watch is that, in the books, Jon didn't just allow the wildlings to pass through the wall without first making a few demands. Not only did the Lord Commander make all 3,000 wildlings surrender their valuables, he also required 100 boys as hostages. Another thing is that Jon convinced 63 wildling men to join the Night's Watch, though only 2 of them officially swore the oath. This part of the show will probably be the opening scene for the Wall in the Winds of Winter. Back in show, Ed commands his brothers to take Alliser and the other traitors to the Ice Cells, and then brings Tormund to go see Jon's body. Down in the capital, this guy tells the story of how he whipped out his Longclaw in front of Cersei during her walk of penance, and although he might be blessed down south, there's not much brains up north. Inside the Red Keep, the Mountain shows up to escort the Queen to her daughter's funeral. Unfortunately, her son the King commanded his Lannister soldiers to keep her from leaving the castle. They show up rolling deep as hell, knowing full well that if shit comes to a head with the new Kingsguard, they'll need at least a baker's dozen to stop him. Luckily for this guy, Cersei backs down, not wanting to defy her son nor kill her household guard. This scene makes me think that the preview we got in the Season 6 trailer, the one with Lancel and his "Order your men to step aside or there will be violence," is going to play out similar to this one, though instead of Cersei backing down, she's going to order the violence. Heading to Visenya's High Hill to the Great Sept of Baelor, Tommen and Jaime mourn over Myrcella. Jaime tries to play the father role, asking Tommen why he won't allow his mother to come see her daughter, and he says that the High Sparrow won't allow it. The king then asks if Tristane's killers have been caught, though he assumes it was orchestrated by Cersei. By the way, Tommen asking about Tristane proves that the Dornish prince was killed in Blackwater Bay and that the Sand Snakes somehow teleported to King's Landing. The High Sparrow enters the Sept and we get a standoff between him and the Kingslayer. Jaime starts to confess his sins and ask what his punishment should be. It's important to point out that the Sparrow never answers his question. The Lord Commander puts his hand on his knife, but the High Sparrow is like, "What, son? You won't? I'm ready to die. Are you?" And all his Faith militant members show up. We end this scene with the High Septon threatening to take down the Empire. We know Jaime won't let this slide. Crossing the narrow sea to Meereen, we see Dany's small council meeting for the first time. Varys brings up the burnt fleet, and Grey Worm says that no one saw anything, which is extremely hard to believe. Slaver's Bay is huge. I seriously doubt not a single person saw anything. I'm sure the showrunners got rid of the fleet so that they can bring the Ironborn to Dany when it's time for her to head west. Missandei then informs them that the dragons haven't been eating. Tyrion explains that it's probably because they are chained up in the dark. He goes on and tells them that the Targaryen dragons brought over from Old Valyria were monstrous, but started growing smaller and smaller until they were all gone, once the Targaryens started keeping him in the dragon pit. It's kinda like the goldfish theory. Put a goldfish in a small tank, the goldfish will stay small. Put one in a huge pond, and the goldfish will grow huge. Tyrion asks if the dragons have ever threatened her, which is a no, because she's one of Dany's closest friends. She explains that the dragons know this, that they're intelligent. So, Tyrion heads beneath the pyramid to unchain them. Now, if you follow my channel, you know where I stand on the whole secret Targaryen issue. If you're wondering if I changed my mind on whether Tyrion is actually a Targaryen after seeing this episode, the answer is most definitely no. I keep saying that the books are the books and the show is the show. Plus, we know that Tyrion is a friend of Dany, meaning the dragons know this. Oh, and by the way, Varys' face is priceless as he looks on as Tyrion unchains Rhaegal and Viserion. Heading northeast to Braavos, we again see Arya playing the blind beggar. The waif shows up, and this time, Arya is on her feet in a second, a little more prepared for her training, though, once again, she gets her ass handed to her. The waif disappears and returns as our favorite faceless man, Jaqen H'ghar. He tells Arya that if she just says her name, he will return her sight. Arya, being the tough little lady that she is, replies with, "A girl has no name." She passes the test and Jaqen tells her to follow him, most likely back to the House of Black and White, presumably to start the next part of her training. Back to the west at Winterfell, the new Lord Karstark, son of the man Robb executed at Riverrun, arrives to inform Lord Roose and Ramsay that his bolted men were found dead with no sign of Theon or Lady Sansa. Ramsay knows where Sansa is going though, and suggests storming Castle Black. Roose believes this to be folly, that all the northern houses would rise up against them if they were to kill the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. However, Ramsay says that they only need the support of the Umbers, the Manderleys, and the Karstarks because they can muster up the largest armies. Now, book readers and smart show watchers know that Ramsay is incredibly wrong on this. House Umber and House Manderley were King Robb's biggest supporters. The great Jon Umber was the first to declare Robb Stark as king in the north, and in the books, the Manderleys are secretly supporting Stannis as long as Davos can find the youngest Stark son, Rickon. Back in the scene, their maester shows up and informs Roose that Fat Walda finally has given birth to a son. We get another possible book spoiler when Ramsay puts a knife in Roose's heart, just as Roose did to King Robb at the Red Wedding. Lord Karstark isn't surprised by this action, implying that he knew this was going to happen. Finally comes the most despicable act Ramsay has done thus far in the show, feeding his stepmother and newborn half-brother to his hounds. If you didn't despise the Bolton bastard before, you're probably sadistic, and if you definitely don't despise him now, go see a shrink. Getting to Sansa and company, last week the river that we saw her and Theon crossing was most likely the last river, considering Lord Karstark found those dead Bolton men. Sansa and her group are most likely somewhere between Carhold and the Last Hearth, the seats of the Karstarks and the Umbers respectively. Now for some reason, Brienne is already lying to Sansa about her sister, which isn't a great way to start a friendship. Maybe she didn't want to frighten Sansa by telling her that her sister was with the Hound, but most likely showrunners didn't mention him so that the audience is more surprised when we find out the Hound is still alive. Theon then comes over and tells Sansa that he can't stay with them for the fear of what Jon Snow might do to him once they reach the Wall. He decides to head back home, back to Pike, the seat of House Greyjoy. Not sure how he's gonna get from here to there with just a horse when the whole north wants you dead. Speaking of Pike, let's talk about King Balon and his daughter. She reads a letter claiming that the Glovers have retaken Deepwood Motte. In the book, Yara, who the show changed from Asha, was the one holding Deepwood Motte when King Stannis retook the castle for House Glover. She then becomes one of Stannis' prisoners. Back in the show, the Ironborn no longer hold northern lands. Balon wants to take more, but Yara thinks it's a bad idea, that the Ironborn belong on the sea. Balon gets pissed and tells her to obey or be disinherited. Then we get one of the most anticipated moments for book readers, the appearance of Balon's brother, Euron Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye. Though this Euron is missing his eye patch. In the books, we learn that Euron was sent away for raping their brother Victarion's wife. Now, Victarion isn't casted in the show, which I hate, but whatever. Also, in the books, it's quite ambiguous as to how exactly Balon died. Story is that he fell off a bridge during a storm. Euron sails into port the next day, so readers first assume that he was involved with Balon's death. Some even think he was killed by a faceless man, possibly Jaqen H'ghar. Although, it is quite obvious Euron was going to attack his brother, Balon's death was actually caused by self-defense, considering Balon drew first blood. The next day, after finding his body, Yara swears by the Salt Throne that she will find her father's killers, but then the Damp Fair tells her that there will be a Kingsmoot, an old Ironborn tradition when all the lords and all the ship captains decide on who shall rule them. A lot of book readers didn't think this was going to happen, so we're all really excited. And once again, we at last arrive back at the Wall. Melisandre is found by Davos staring off into the fire. Davos asks her for help in trying to bring Jon Snow back. Not really sure what his motivation is here for helping Jon, but like I said, I'm trying not to nitpick. Since season 3, we all had a feeling it was going to come to this. In the books, Mel never meets with the Brotherhood without banners. So having her meet Thoros in the show was a perfect setup for the resurrection of John. Ed, Davos, and Tormund look on as Melisandre does her work. Nothing happens. Tormund looks at Davos like this is bullshit and leaves the room, followed by Ed, and lastly, Davos and Mel leave as well. Then the moment that everyone waited for. John wakes up and the episode ends. We'll talk about that next week because it looks like the show is gonna continue John's story in episode 3. We got 8 more weeks to go. And, as always, share, like, and subscribe to stay updated and be the first to watch newly uploaded videos.